Betty Friedan, where'd you get the name for your book, The Fountain of Age?
But it's not the Fountain of Youth. Everybody in America is obsessed with the Fountain of Youth. You know, that's the old Ponce de Leon. What I saw once I was really going on this track that led me to the book, that what's wrong, a mystique of age, more pernicious, pervasive than the feminine mystique, is somehow definition of age only in terms of decline from youth, and not as what it is, a period of human life that people didn't even used to have, most people, that should be seen as a new period of human life in its own terms, hence the Fountain of Age.
At what age did you go on Outward Bound?
I think I was in my early 60s.
Why?
Well, I told myself that I was doing it to do research for the book. Because the kind of people I was looking for, women and men that would continue to develop and evolve and that didn't fit that deterioration decline. And I was already beginning to see that a strong element of that was adventurousness, of a willingness to risk, an ability to risk in ways you couldn't do when you were younger. And then I figured I'd find them on this, but really secretly, it was something I'd always yearned to do myself, that kind of wilderness exploration kind of thing. And in my long married life and then in my hectic, life since my divorce, where all this women's movement and lecturing this, I'd somehow never done this wilderness stuff, so I really wanted to do it myself. And then, of course, what it became was a metaphor of this whole search for the Fountain of Age.
Can you remember where it all started? I mean, the Outward Bound thing. Who went on it?
Oh, well, that one, it was their first time when they experimented. Outward Bound was this rigorous wilderness survival kind of thing that Peace Corps trainees used to go on. And they decided to do one for people 55 plus, over 55. It was called Going Beyond. And this was the first one like that. And I don't know, we met somewhere at some airport in the South. And first thing you did, we went river rafting on the Chattahoochee River, sort of Tennessee, Georgia, where Deliverance, the movie Deliverance, was done. And there was this wild river, rafting in the rapids and so on. And then there was 24 hours alone in the wilderness sites. It was traipsing through kind of wild territory without a guide, with just compass and so on and so forth. And then there was this cliffs and rappelling, and that was my fun. I don't have to prove myself this way. That's why I say the whole thing was a metaphor. And it was quite marvelous.
And you didn't tell people your last name when you started this thing?
No, we didn't. I don't think we told people our ages, and I don't think we told people our last names nor our professions. It was just maybe what city we came from or something like that, but it was no real identifying thing. So I wasn't seen through my mask, as it were, my persona, the great feminist leader. And, there was this, we became great friends. It was a retired insurance executive from North Carolina, Earl Arthurs, and he was a big burly man, Dartmouth class of 38, it turned out, and he was the oldest of our group, and he was then in his 70s. But he was clearly the leader. I mean, there were men there, 55. He sort of somehow had to really hang back sometimes and let some of these others take the lead. And he would always, I'm not a jock, so he'd kind of help me over the fences or, cliffs or God knows what. And I had a terrible time getting my backpack adjusted right. And he was, always, very helpful, and We like not, and of course the feminist stance is to not accept such help. But please, I needed all the help I could get. Right?
Now, what'd you learn about yourself?
Well, I mean, I was able to do it, and it was the adventurousness of it was terrific, and even it was great fun for me to just be on my own without having to wear my public mask, and I loved it. And then, toward the end, when there was some repelling thing where I really didn't master it enough to feel in control of it, and I was going to swing out around this cliff, and I was scared to death, and I think rightly, because I didn't feel rightly in control of, that I hadn't done it enough, to feel in control of it. The river rafting, all that, they gave us some learning period, and I did it. I could do it all right, but this I didn't feel in control of. And I just finally said, get me out of here. I didn't. And so then one of the other women, when she came down on it, she said, she took, set loose to come down on this rappelling. She said, you've given me the courage to do it. I said, I've given you the courage to do it. Here I was, I thought a coward that I said, no, I'm not doing this. I finally said, take me out of here, and they had to lift me up off the cliff. And she said, no, if you had the guts to do that and say, this is not for me, then I can do it.
What was your reaction when people found out who you were? And had anybody figured it out?
The women knew, but they kept my cover. They didn't. But these guys were amazed.
The men did. None of the men knew who you were.
No, this was 10 years ago, but they were not. They knew who I was once it was said. In other words, but they hadn't. Listen, they recognized me as all in all these sweatpants and this gear. And I didn't look like I look on television. Not that I look so great. Anyway, so one of them, Earl, we became great friends. My protector. See, I mean, and he always claimed. I don't know if he's telling the truth, but I think he really didn't know he was. I wasn't taken by your fame. I was taken by your gutsy spirit. See, but about every year he comes to New York and takes me dancing at the Rainbow Room. He's a wonderful dancer. And then he's one of the people that really is the fountain of age. Here he'd been all these years, this, big shot in North Carolina, Charlotte, and an big insurance agency, and was a pillar of the community and all that. And his wife he had nursed his wife through 10 years, I think, of lung cancer. So, after she died, he started going on. He took a lot of cruises, traveling. He was lonesome, and he's such a good dancer. And so he would, in his courtly style, dance with all the ladies that outnumber the men on these cruises. So he got offered a job as a cruise host, and so he spends most of his time now on these fantastic cruises all over the place where he's one of they have a name for it. It's like host, whatever. And he got me to go on one. Cruises are not for me, but I went for 3 days just to see him in action. And it was, and he's having the time of his life. It's not your usual occupation for Dartmouth class of 38 or whatever he was, and the big shot insurance magnate. But he's having this marvelous, adventurous last third of his life doing this.
What year did you write The Feminine Mystique?
63, 30 years ago. It was published. I wrote it for the 5 years earlier than that.
Over those 30 years, what's happened to that book? Can you still buy it in bookstores?
Oh, sure. It's assigned in colleges and in classes. I guess it's considered, it's on these lists of the 10 books through all time that have shaped history or whatever. And it's assigned in college courses, or American history or sociology or whatnot. The young people are reading it. I'm amazed that they still find it so applicable, because we have changed so much since that book and Breaking Through the Feminine Mystique. But what intrigues me is that women of all ages still stop me if they run into me in the airport or the street, or it changed my life, and they tell me where they were, when they read it, I was in the hospital having my third child, whatever. I was doing this, I was doing that, because it really did have this effect of putting into words what they'd been groping and yearning for, and it enabled them to take steps to change their life. And the interesting thing now is that my book, The Fountain of Age, that men are telling me. I mean, men, and some women too, of course, but men are having the same sort of emotional reaction that women had to the feminine mystique, of saying, it's made me think altogether differently about the rest of my life and whatever.
How many copies did you sell, up till now? Mystique. No, The Feminine Mystique.
Oh, God, I don't know by now. Like millions, in about 20 countries. I have no idea how many, but years ago they were saying 3 million, so it must be a lot more than that now.
What were you doing when you wrote that book?
What was I doing? Well, I was technically a housewife in Rockland County, suburban New York, with 3 kids. I had been kind of freelancing for women's magazines after I'd been fired from a newspaper job for being pregnant with my second child. And what I later called The Feminine Mystique was filling me full of guilt anyway for working, even though, my husband had been in the theater, and then starting in advertising, we needed my paycheck, but I'd been feeling so guilty. Now I'm fired. You couldn't look for a job with your belly out to here, pregnant, not in those years, not now too. So I was technically a housewife, but I couldn't quite get rid of the itch to do something, so I was freelancing for magazines, mainly the women's magazines, like Secret Drinking in the Morning, because none of the other mothers in that suburb were working then. It was the end of the feminine mystique period, and after about 5 years of writing according to this limited image that was supposed to be the image, the American woman then, solely in terms of her husband, children, home, nothing else, I got restive about it, and I began to, through the happenstance of doing the 15th reunion questionnaire of my Smith, alumni. Since they were saying education is making women frustrated in their role as women, too much education. Now, I had valued my education. I thought I was going to disprove that with this questionnaire of Smith 42, and instead it raised more questions than it answered. And then when the magazines that I wrote for, one after the other, either turned it down or rewrote it to say the opposite, and I took it back, I knew I'd have to write the book, The Feminine Mystique. But I didn't have any sense then. I mean, every chapter I finished, I thought, gee, I must be crazy, because it so went against everything that was accepted as both the conventional and sophisticated truth about women. And but the idea that it would have the impact it did, they say it sort of really started the consciousness part of the women's movement that led to the modern women's movement. I mean, in my gut, I guess I knew that it was very important, but I didn't have the confidence I later acquired. It's just, it's such a mystery to me that I was able to write that book. Now, of course, of the experiences and the skills or whatever, my training as a psychologist, journalist, the life I lived, that enabled me to write The Feminine Mystique. But now, when The Fountain of Age, I had also the training that came from breaking through the feminine mystique and helping to give the vision of the women's movement. So I tackled this new problem, which is beyond feminism. It's a different problem. But I guess I was able to tackle that as I began to recognize that I was dealing with another mystique, that it was, I wasn't interested in age, not me. Oh, I had the same dreary view of age as anybody in America, the same absolute denial. It didn't apply to me. But once I began on this little path, the large path that led me to break through an even more pernicious, pervasive mystique, the mystique of age only has declined from youth. I guess all the 30 years from rotting the feminine mystique to the women's movement gave me a way to well, I can't say more quickly because it took me 10 years to write this book, but at least to be able to break through this other thing.
Connections. You point out that Joe Duffy, who was head of the National Endowment of Humanities, had some money for this project back in the late 70s.
Well, when I decided I wanted to do this, I knew I had to immerse myself in research, in other words, a field that was new to me, to find out what research had been done on aging, because I saw that somehow there was no image of age except this nursing home, senility, Alzheimer's, decline, deterioration from youth. But what I was seeing first in women and then even in men too is people moving into their 60s, 70s, and 80s with vitality and even growth, and development. And there was something wrong here, and that women somehow had an edge on men in this, although the men interested me here just as much as the women, why the men were dying younger. So I knew I needed I didn't get enough of a publisher advance to do what I knew would have to be some years doing the research. So I went to see Joe Duffy, who was then head of the National Endowment for the Humanities. Now he's head of the U.S. Information Service in this new cabinet. And I said to him, look, I'm not a PhD. I've not got a PhD in sociology or gerontology. I'm not an academic. But I want to do this book, and I call it Changing Sex Roles in the Aging Process. That was my title then. I want to do this, and I need some help to get the research done and to make my way through everything that's been done so far, in addition to my own interviews. So he said, well, did you have a PhD when you wrote The Feminine Mystique? And I said, no. And he said, well, your track record is good enough for me. And that was really pretty marvelous of Joe, I thought, and then the peer review, well, the academics vetoed it. So he got pretty annoyed at that, but he gave me a chairman's grant. And then Columbia University, the Center for Social Sciences, Jonathan Cole, who was himself a very quantitative sociology, but recognized the value of the kind of qualitative sociology that I guess you could say I do. He took me to McGeorge Bundy at the Ford Foundation, and they gave me the rest of the money that I needed. And that was all a great help, because it took me a lot longer than I thought it was going to.
Where do you live now?
I have an apartment in New York, and I kind of sort of feel more rooted. I have a little old house in Sag Harbor, an old whaling town, on the Sound, and that's where my kids bring my grandkids and so on, and that's where I did most of the writing. And then 4 months of the year, I teach in Los Angeles at University of Southern California, and in the fall I am a visiting professor at New York University. So 4 months of the year I live in a different place each time in Santa Monica or L.A.
You refer in the book several times that you feel better after going through the book process than you did before about aging?
Well, I wrote myself into a completely new place. It was very liberating. and again, it's mysterious in a way. But I was absolutely as much in denial. I mean, age, please. They say to me, what's this I hear, Betty, that you're writing a book about age? And this eyes would glaze over. And I'd say, oh, no, not me. I mean, you got it wrong. I've got this, here my the flaming radical, the cutting edge. Age. Because I had the same dreary view of it, absolutely denial as anyone else. And I'd say, no, I've got this far out hypothesis about women and men and changing sex roles, the aging process. I was, then when I actually started working on the book, and I took a fellowship at Harvard at the Institute of Politics at the Kennedy School, and I taught the second stage, which was a book that I had just finished. And I taught a seminar on that, but otherwise I could use the resources of the university. I figured I'd immerse myself in whatever research had been done. And in that great university, all I could find was medical school, Alzheimer's, nursing home, so on, ethical issues, when do you pull the plug. I'd go to these conferences and the gerontological meetings I was beginning to attend, these paneled halls, and the young Turks in their white coats with research money for aging, and they would talk about them, sort of with that same contemptuous compassion. Rick, it reminded me of something. It reminded me of the way the male experts on women used to talk about the woman problem, all those years ago. And I'd come out of that feeling so depressed. That didn't interest me at all, this Alzheimer's, nursing home. And then I began to interview women and men that I was finding much more easily than I thought I would, who were clearly very vital in these years beyond 60 and beyond 70, even beyond 80. I remember one I interviewed in Cambridge beyond 90, and they were continuing to grow and develop. So that would exhilarate me. And then I'd feel depression, exhilaration, and then a kind of a weird panic. And I thought, what is wrong with me? What is wrong with me? I never had that kind of much writing block before, whatever. And then I realized what was wrong with me. That I just had my own 60th birthday. And I was furious when my friends threw me a surprise party on my 60th birthday. And I felt very hostile to them, and that they were very hostile to me to have done that. Because I was in as much denial as anyone else. And then one day I was interviewing in Palm Springs, and there was this woman. She was clearly older than I was. She had flaming red hair, but the white roots, were visible. She had on a very short mini skirt, tennis skirt, with crepey legs, underneath. And she said, oh, how nice. I hear you're writing a book about those poor old people. And I said, no, not writing a book about them. I'm writing a book about us. And she said, oh, not me. I mean, I will never be old, not me. And I began to do what I had to do to write this book, which was to break through my own denial. And as I had to be able to say us. And in my own reality, which didn't fit any of these images. And then I found in the research all kinds of facts that defied this image of deterioration and decline that for most people now takes place only at the very end of life, just before death, or well into their 80s. And even if you measure with the test standardized in youth, that the decline is not what the image is. But nobody really, or it's just begun, a measurement of what evolves. Youth is not the peak. There are qualities of, we don't even have words for them in this society, wisdom, qualities that emerge in you that if you're still just looking at yourself, a youth, trying to pretend you're young long after you're not young really anymore, even if you have 5 facelifts, you're not going to look young. You look like a mummy without any character, without any experience. But, what what evolves. I mean, when I wrote The Feminine Mystique, I talked about problems that had no name. When I began to look into women, and it was easier for women, but also more and more new kind of men that are moving into a different kind of age. Might call it pioneers of a new kind of age, because there's no role models, there's no maps, there's no guidance. I see strengths that have no name.
Should people have to retire at 65?
That, I mean, there are certain words that absolutely we must protest against. You know, retire is one. I mean, old is another. Old, static, and has got this whole connotation of decline, deterioration, and state. Older is okay. People growing older. Don't deny the person. Retire. You retire from society. You go into a retirement community. You're supposed to be out of the larger community. We should not buy all this. Even though forced retirement, losing your job because of your age, is supposed to be illegal. You know that it's happening, that people are being forced out, eased out, downsized out, and not only even in their 60s, in their 50s, they can't very easily find another job, even if they dye their hair, try to phony their age. I think that the idea that you must retire from society, 60, 65, 70, whatever, when you've got all this ability and experience, you could retire, or you could leave, or you'd be forced out, from a job that even against your will, or even be burned out and want to, but not retire from society, move from one structure, one project shaping your life, the career lines that were really based on youth, to something else. But to suddenly say we are retiring all these people, this fastest growing group of people in our whole society, from being productive members of the society to be just a drain or a burden, or be made invisible, walled out of sight in a continuing care community, as if their only identity now is objects of terminal nursing care, when they don't even need that until just before their death, in a very advanced age. This is a new period of life to be lived. The years that people didn't used to have. Life expectancy, the turn of the century, 45 for men, 46 for women. It's over 75 now. It's nearly 80 for women, over 72 for men. New years of life, out roadmaps, out without role models. We will be the pioneers of a new kind of age. And behind us are the bulge of the baby boomers, getting into a trauma as they approach their 50th birthday. A woman was interviewing me the other day, and she said, "Oh, this book has come just in time for me." And I looked at her. She was a lovely-looking young woman. She said, "Just had my 30th birthday." Well, but they, with all their numbers, and they created the youth culture, the songs of the 60s, the Beatles, all that. They will take this revolution, which will be the revolution of the turn of the century, over the top.
Do you have a living will?
Absolutely. And I'd like to, and I'm going to see to it my kids have something that you can't really put in your living will. Never, ever, ever put me in a nursing home.
Why?
That image of deterioration and decline that is so awful, that you can't, it's no wonder that people deny age in this country. That is a reality in nursing homes. If not when they come in, and a high proportion of people in nursing homes are defined, senile. Some of it is real senility, but to my surprise, only 5% of people over 65 have any kind of senility, including Alzheimer's. But if they don't have it when they come in, the absolute dehumanized, infantilized treatment of the nursing home, the sedation, if you will, they will acquire the signs of senility. And what we need is not more nursing homes. What we need is more measures that are not necessarily medical, that will enable people to stay in their own communities and in their own homes. And because you can't deny death at the point where such a life is not possible and you really do have a terminal condition, then the hospice movement, which does not intervene with the high-tech machinery to give people an extra week or day or month of painful, life where you can't really function, but enables you to face death in the midst of your own family and friends as painlessly as possible. We don't deny death, but death should be in the midst of life.
You dedicate this book to the memory of my mother, Miriam, and my father, Harry, who made a larger life possible for me. What did they do for you?
Well, I grew up in Peoria, Illinois, and my father was a brilliant man, but he was an immigrant with no higher education, though he read philosophy every night after dinner, and I think he went to the famous Clarence Darrow debate, and he sent his youngest brother to Harvard Law School and was inordinately proud of all my, intellectual accomplishments. And my mother grew up in Peoria and went to the local college, Bradley, and then she had been the women's page editor of the newspaper there. But of course, she had to quit that, when she married my father and started having kids. She couldn't wait for me to get into junior high school and get me to try out for the paper and all that. I edited the college paper at Smith. That was one of the most fun things in my life. But she insisted that I get a good education, and in fact, and my father said to me on his deathbed, "Don't come back here." In other words, go beyond. And my father died too young, and he was in his early 60s, and he had that premature kind of heart, that the male role and the inability to even express the pain you may be feeling. I think he endured the anti-Semitism of a Middle West small town at that time, and the pressures of depression and all that. And my mother lived till she was 90. And my mother, it was my mother's frustrations that I think gave me the psychological motivation for the women's movement. But my mother, at the age of 70-odd, after burying her third husband, got herself licensed as a duplicate bridge manager. She's always been a brilliant card player. And she would tootle around. She lived in Leisure World in Laguna Hills, California. She would tootle around and running these duplicate bridge tournaments into her 80s with the prodigious feats of memory that required. And I was coming out to California, and I knew I'd be on TV, and I thought, oh, God, I've got to go see Mother. And it terrifies me to drive in California because I can't stand the freeways. So it was so easy to get from L.A. to Laguna Hills. So I'd call up and I'd say, "Mother, I'm going to be in L.A. In 2 weeks. Can we meet?" "Darling," she would say, "I'm so busy. Why don't you let me know longer in advance?" She was no pathetic old lady, being dependent, whatever.
You mentioned Leisure World. What do you think of the Leisure World type places?
Well, I spent a lot of time interviewing in those places. And there were some people that seemed to make a good life for themselves there. They were mainly people that took responsibility for organizing the community and so on and so forth. But with all, it struck me that even the physical appearance of the place was walled off from the larger community. And then, as if the whole life could be structured around sort of busy play. You know, in other words, kinds of clubhouse activities, that there was something about it, and then walled off from the whole continuum of life, you know, that other generations. Something about it that it was like this mystique of age, you know, this almost a denial of the personhood of age, translated into brick and stucco, and they were a kind of, even the luxurious age ghettos. I don't think they're the wave of the future if we break through this pernicious definition of age just as decline. I was very interested to see a couple of weeks ago, story on the front page of the New York Times, that more and more people, older people, are coming back from Florida and those retirement communities to New York. You know, dirty, busy, complex New York with all its problems, but where there's so much life going on and where you can take the bus, take the subway, you know, walk to things.
In your dedication, you also talk about Daniel and Jonathan and Emily and Raphael and Caleb. Is it Natalia?
Yeah, Natalia.
David, Isabel, Laura, Brigitta,
Yes?
and Benjamin, whose mother and grandmother I am.
That's proud of that, right.
How many of those are your children?
I have, well, there's my 3 children, Daniel, Jonathan, and Emily, and then my 8 grandchildren, 6 blood grandchildren and 2 step-granddaughters. They are actually from Iceland. My oldest son is a theoretical physicist, married the only woman physicist of Iceland. She had 2 daughters from a previous marriage, and then now they have this wonderful little baby, my youngest grandchild, Benjamin.
Have you ever sat down with your 3 kids and talked about aging?
Not as such. I mean, they've all gotten copies of my living will, and they when I said to them, you know, I'm going to leave you the house in Sag Harbor jointly, and they said, oh, we've already had a meeting about it, and we're going, and how they were going to run it and use it as a joint, you know, place to come to with other kids so they can come together. But the family ties of my children with each other and with their father and with me are very strong, and I like that. And as you, in the dedication of my book, The Fountain of Age, as you see, the first part says that on the wall of my kitchen in Sag Harbor, there's some Hebrew letters from a song, a Hebrew song that from generation to generation. And then, I don't know, they had some party there, and someone had tacked that song on the wall, and I love the look of Hebrew literature. Anyway, but that's in that kitchen is where we all get together, and I had this long dining table, which will hold now the 14 of us, or when we're all in residence, and so, you know, from generation to generation. I mean, you know, the last chapter of my book, The Fountain of Age, is generativity. You know, the freedom to risk, age's adventure, and generativity, because I think finally, in what evolves, there is a sense of the affirmation of your whole life as you've lived it in the history, and then some great sense of the meaning of that life, and that life is your life is a part of the continuum that will live after you, through your children, through your grandchildren, but also, you know, through your human generativity that's not just biological. I mean, for me, it's been the women's movement, and for me, it's you know, also the social and political causes that to make the world better that somehow are part of my morality, and even this last 10 years task of breaking through the mystique of age, the fountain of age, and what may come of that. I mean, my sense is, even from what's already happening, that there are implications here for revolutionary social change. I can't predict what form it will take any more than I could have predicted the women's movement after writing The Feminine Mystique. But I think it will happen, and I'm open to what happens, and I'll follow the leads where they come.
In the generativity chapter, you've talked to a lot of people that the audience will recognize: Norman Lear, Jonas Salk, Hugh Hefner, and others. I got some sense that maybe when people get older, they change the way they think about things.
Well, it was interesting to me that, for instance, take Norman Lear, who's one of the men I admire most in this society now, who somehow very successfully and effectively used television in the most non-didactic but marvelous way, All in the Family, to open larger social values to this society, to transcend the polarization and the even racism, all the rest of that, in the most open way. And then doesn't stop, you see. What do you call it? Act 3, or Act 2, when he went Act 2 of his life, or Act 3, whatever.
He did get to Act 3. Yes.
Right. And he says, and then he very openly now professes a certain spiritual dimension that his cynical Hollywood colleagues must, very openly is concerned with saving the environment and with people for the American way, where to sort of protect the liberties of America from the Constitution, from the moves to censorship that have been plaguing the television industry. Or even Hugh Hefner, here is Hugh Hefner with the whole Playboy thing and the Playboy bunnies and all that. And his later years, he sort of liberated himself from the rigid reaction against the sexual puritanism of his youth. And he's handed over Playboy to his daughter, Christy, who's, really quite a wonderful woman. And he's liberated not to have to just try to shock, and defy the rigidities of his youth. He can move beyond that. And this is what I see happening to people when they continue to grow and develop. In ways that all those years of psychoanalysis may or may not have done, you liberated from the conflicts and the rigidities that hemmed you in before.
If you live as long as your mother lived, you got another 20 years to go.
Oh, that would be nice. What you read from the last line of the book, it's really quite true. I have somehow, in the process of writing this book, I've liberated myself. Somehow I have moved from this denial and dread of age to an affirmation of where I am now, which is a very unknown place. It's, there's I feel that things are changing all around me, and I am more myself, I am myself with all my faults, and I've had pains in my past, and bad things can happen to me still, and it's all a part of it, but I am there finally, and I am very interested and open to changes that are happening around, and I just somehow the sense that it's not true that you have to love the way you loved when you were 30 or not love at all. It opens you to whatever happens, in a way that's different from youth. Some ways it's the same, but it's different. It's different. And it opens you to new dimensions in your intimacy and your friendship. And I got invited to go on an expedition in the rainforest and the Amazon, which has always been a fantasy of mine, and in January. And I'm going to go if I can assure myself that there's going to be no mosquitoes because I can't stand mosquitoes, you see. But and it's like I'm open, and it's exciting.
When you teach at USC, University of Southern California, what do you teach?
Well, I lead a complex academic life. I run a project in the School of Journalism called Women, Men, and Media that's funded by the Freedom Forum and that monitors in an ongoing way the media, all the mass media images of women and men. And that's been a big, feminine mystique, after all, was a breaking through of the media image of women. And Fountain of Ages in another way, women and men. And I, at the Leadership Institute of the School of Business, I run a think tank, which had been, up to now, new dimensions of feminist thought. It was activists, policymakers, and academics. And this year it's going to be on thinking for a new age, for the new age. And risking new ways of loving and living together, and of working, and of money, and of medical care, and health care, and of new social and political values. Then I also teach a course and lectures on, in the Leadership Institute of the School of Business, on management and diversity. There's threats to that now, and there's enormous possibilities. I mean, with the experience of women, with experience of people that are older than the conventional, as well as the racial differences, that we have begun to embrace and use diversity. With our economic, the downside and so on is there's got to be some new grasp of all this and of the importance of it, and maybe even some alternate work structures that come out of it. So that's another thing that I do. And then I also teach in the professional writing program. I do half of a seminar on, and my part is writing from personal truth and social observation.
How about at New York University?
About what?
At New York University, what do you
Duke
teach
University,
there?
I do the Women, Men, and Media and the Diversity and Management.
In this last chapter, you mentioned the Dominican nun, and you have a lot of different people that you talk about here, but you say that she recounted her own lifelong struggle to name herself. I am a lesbian nun. If I had a choice, I would be exactly who I am. She told of the long years when she had no close friends at all. What was the point of that one?
Well, it showed her evolution to an authenticity about herself. To see that, and this is what the research and my own interviews show, that if you continue to grow and develop through the years and the new years of life that are open to you, you become more and more authentically yourself. You shed the masks, and that is enormously liberating. And finally, with all its pains, you affirm the life that you have lived, and you put it all together. And that woman, I was very struck by that account of hers. I found it somewhere, that she had lived so much of her life denying an essential part of herself and according to a mask, and she finally got rid of the mask.
You wrote about Helen and Richard Dudman.
Oh, yes. They were one of my first sense of the pioneering, adventurous possibilities of age. I got to know them when he was the head of the Washington Bureau of the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. She had been women's page editor of the Washington Post, and then she had been working for public broadcasting. She should have been made manager of the station there in Washington when it opened up, and she was passed over for a man, so real mad. And they decided that he would take early retirement, and they had a shack on an island. Well, it was a cabin, whatever you want to call it, island in Maine, and that in the little town near their island, a radio station was for sale. And So they kind of borrowed the money and bought the radio station. She ran the radio station. He kept working in Washington till the station began to be in the black, and then they started a whole new life for them. Then he took early retirement from the newspaper. He said, "I'm not going to stay on in this town where once you've had the power that being a leading journalist gives you, then you don't have that any longer, and you hang on. Instead, I want to make a new life for myself." And I go to see them in New Hampshire. I mean, in Maine. This radio station is a great success. He helped her. I mean, she was running it. He helped a little in the news division, but he began to do his own thing with not only building boats, which he had intended to do. I don't think he's ever going to get that boat finished, but he's doing north-south editing and teaching in journalism in the third world countries from a center in Hanover. And she's about at the point where she's handing over the radio station to their daughters, who moved up there too with their kids, so she can go with Richard on some of these third world adventures. And they are really role models for the Fountain of Age.
You found Flora Lewis, who writes a column from time to time for the New York Times, that used to be their foreign correspondent.
Yeah. I interviewed her about the last year I was working on the book. She had come to speak in L.A., and she took the lecture so she should go see her mother, who was in a nursing home. And Flora, after all those years as a foreign correspondent and a columnist, was somehow, I don't know what exactly, she had made a new use of her experience, sort of lecturing all over Europe, she's committed to the sort of one world international thing. She's a brilliant woman, and it really interests me when you ask people like the Dudmans or Flora Lewis, but let's not assume that everybody that I interviewed was something glamorous like a foreign correspondent. I interviewed plenty of women on Social Security who also were making new lives for themselves, and if you try to get them to put into words the difference between what they feel about themselves and now, let's say 70-something compared to, say, 50 or whatever, it's really interesting how their judgments are not so rigid, black and white, that they've acquired a new ease. They see things whole. They've got a kind of a comfort and assurance and authority. They know who they are. They don't care so much what other people think. You can see it in their faces. It's sort of I really recognize it. I recognize it when a woman reaches that point. Suddenly, there's a new kind of serenity and assurance or a radiance in her face. I know one woman, and she's a marvelous woman that I know in California, and she just looks so different. I don't know. She's maybe not quite as thin as she used to be. She stopped dyeing her hair, and she used to somehow not project the confidence that she has now, and the sort of comfort with herself. And she just required, strengths that have no name. That's although I don't even know their word for it, but there it is.
You write several times, you mentioned Marlene Sanders.
Well, Marlene Sanders is one of my best friends, and we've been through a lot together. When she called me in the middle of the night when she was the first woman to be made vice president for news of a network. And of course she has, even when network people were supposed to not be political, she was one of the large underground of women in the networks that supported the movement and did what they could do. Now we run the Woman, Men, and Media project together with Nancy Woodhull. And she's, because she's close to me, I use a lot of my own friends because I could observe all these interesting little things like when she's widowed and Jerry, her husband, was a wonderful man, and then she finally sold the big apartment that they had, and she's in a smaller but very perfect for her, sunny, airy, new space, and she's. I like to see the way she copes with very clearly. I mean, if you know her, she's a very clear-headed person, much more clear-headed than I am, I sometimes feel. And so she's make these changes in her life in a very good way, and I like to see it.
Do you have another book you plan to write?
At this moment, my dear, I am so relieved to get this. You know that I shipped 7 years, back and forth across the country, 20 boxes of papers, of notes, of books for, because each year when I'd go for my spring, winter teaching at the University of Southern California, and I mean, I just was drowning in all that research, and the fact that I finally finished that book is such a liberation, and I don't know, I don't want to do another heavy book like that. I'm going to do short stuff. Maybe I'll do a column. Maybe I'll do a program like you. Maybe I'll do a detective story. Maybe I'll write science fiction or a novel, but no more heavy books.
The name of the book is The Fountain of Age, and our guest has been Betty Friedan. Thank you for joining us.